Okay.
Okay, try plugging it in.
Well, that worked.
Something's happening here.
Something is happening. Slow.
Numbers.
Yay.
Yes. Oh, about 200, so not too.
Wow, a success here in studio. Okay, so I'm not going to be able to see people, so I'm going to have to rely on raising of hands, and Aiko telling me when somebody's hand is raised.
Okay, well then I better bring the people up a little. 'Cause Oh, Bob has already raised his hand.
Oh yes, Bob, you're gonna do something.
Oh, well, I'm not sure if it fits in here. I missed most of last week's and it was on the election. I just wanted to hold up a distant mirror, with apologies to Barbara Tuchman, of an election a long, long time ago in a country far, far away. On July 5th, 1945, the United Kingdom held a general election. Winston Churchill called it. It was just shortly after the Second World War. And the opinion polls definitely had him looking good to get reelected. But what happened was the opinion polls were wrong. And Clement Attlee's Labour Party got elected in a complete and utter landslide.
Wow.
And Churchill was kicked ignominiously out of office on a day that he had nominated for an election, because in Britain you can call an election any time you want within 5 years of a government. And I just wanted to point out the mirror of that to some extent, and there was perhaps an unexpected and larger swing towards Trump than had been expected. The question is, why was Winston Churchill kicked out of office? Why did the Labour Party get 393 seats and the Conservatives, the Tories, only 197? They got almost twice as many seats. There were more new members of Parliament in July 5th, 1945, that had no parliamentary experience, newly elected MPs. That number was only beaten this July when the Labour Party of Sir Keir Starmer's overwhelmed the Conservatives. And my father always told me the reason they kicked Churchill out of office was not to say you did a bad job leading the country through the Second World War, but because the armed services, the members of the armed services, had it up to the gills with those posh, chinless wonders who were the officers who ordered them around endlessly and sometimes stupidly for 5 years, actually almost 6 years. And so they voted on a class basis against the officer class. Anyway, that's my distant mirror.
Well, some people think that this was a class election here. Just going back to 1945, another theory is the national health system. It had been debated during the war. The Labor Party had talked about, hey, all the sacrifices we're making, we should at least get a good healthcare system. And that's another theory.
Well, it's true that they were coming out. They didn't want to return to 1930s economic system. And yes, the Labour Party platform had promised nationalization of key industries, a healthcare system, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a very good platform. And in fact, Clement Attlee actually achieved probably more than he had promised. Promises made and promises were kept. And but that didn't stop him getting kicked out in 1951 by Winston Churchill's Conservative Party.
Yeah, coming back again. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Bob. That was interesting. To go back a little further in history, we have all these civilizations. In the BBC, they found a guy who had counted the average lifespan of all these civilizations, and it came out to averaging 336. What that means for this republic, at least we have until 2112 to beat the average lifespan. But I'm not running into many people who are optimistic. So who were all these? You can't read the name of the civilizations, but here they all are. And Ramsey has studied it and thinks they did a pretty good job, particularly because they divided the Tang Dynasty into two parts. That was his basis for grading them. So China, an update. Toby and Gary and Julia, we've done deep dives on China and Ukraine, and there's so much going on with those two that I thought we could do an update. The problem that China's having can be boiled down to the 4D problem. There's a lot of debt in China all around, particularly in the housing market. But a lot of debt has been accumulated by local governments, the county level governments. The other problem is deflation. Pessimism about the future is basically what deflation is. Demography is another measure. When households don't want to have kids, that's another step towards pessimism. And you can see how the fertility rate of China has plummeted. This is going back all the way to the birth of modern day China in 1949. And then the fourth D is Donald. Which is going to be a problem. This compresses the time a little bit on the fertility, and you can see what it's been in this century, a big drop-off recently. So the consumer confidence in China was shattered by COVID, and the optimism has never really recovered. Since lockdowns were lifted. The property market peaked 3 years ago. It's still very fragile. Because of the slowdown and deflation, there's dwindling tax revenues. So you get into a vicious cycle. And there have been just a lackluster spending. People are saving more. And this has been, this deflationary movement has been true for 25 months in a row. So it's not a small problem. So it's really a problem of low future expectations and pessimism. The sweet spot for inflation is around 2%. That would reflect some optimism in the future, and that you want to go ahead and spend the money now and be able to have the goods starting right now. China, though, has resisted fixing it Biden obviously did bold fiscal stimulation, maybe a little bit too much, causing the inflation that hurt the Democrats so much. But China's and Xi Jinping is very Puritan. He's resisting handouts to consumers. They've done some weak movements in refinancing debts of local governments, trading in your old car and appliances. They've done modest cutting of mortgage rates and reduced down payments. And this brings us to one bright spot for China, which is their place in fighting against global warming. For 2 decades, China was a major polluter as it ramped up industrialization. And Chinese officials have done their homework and said and looked at all the pollution that happened while we were in the Industrial Revolution. Of course, that was powered by coal, first in England, Great Britain. And they say, you guys, when you were developing, you certainly polluted a lot more than we did. So China takes a step further. They're trying to be the savior in this current climate, with Trump set to pull out of the Paris Agreement again. They've got a case, but they've already done a lot of investing in global technology, calculated to be 40%. So you can see China's the red, and they're the biggest one. United States is blue. They in Europe are about the same, behind China. So just looking in general at all the investment in non-polluting energy, 40%. But if you look at the existing supply chains, they're 90% of providing the current available technology. They make 90%, and a lot of that is in solar panels, which we talked about a while back, but also wind turbines, electric vehicles,
Sherry,
et cetera.
1 minute. When can you do it?
Hello, I think, Toby, you're not muted. So China also is making lithium batteries, and 8 out of 10 solar panels, and they've done a pretty
Gary,
good job
Could
of
you be
ramping
here
up.
for the installation of the shower doors tomorrow if I went down to have my hair done and join
Toby,
Wesco?
I think we can hear you.
Yes, you could do that, Sherry.
So 2 big advantages over other
Oh, you're very
countries
welcome. We're looking
in
forward
this
to it.
endeavor. They're doing have a high savings rate, so they're defer gratification, and some of that is because of their pessimism. And they're able to direct much of their investment to the champion sectors that they deem worthy. There are other instruments, guidance, funds, cheap loans, and again, local government subsidies for Chinese EV makers and solar panels. But waste is a big problem. Investments are often replicated, and they've accumulated a lot of big debt. So they're suffering from overcapacity, and they're undergoing now a wave of painful consolidation. But their big advantages are they're just pouring out engineering graduates, which we are not. And they, for all the products that they are making, there's a reliable domestic market. And so their champions have proved to be agile and innovative, particularly in batteries and the electric vehicle industry. And so the big backlash that we're all reading about is from all their exporting. And what the EU and America are alleging is they're flooding the market with artificially cheap goods. And so steep tariffs have already been imposed by Biden and the EU, particularly the EU and electric cars. So China has seen the light a little bit, and they've backed off. Yeah, Bob.
Just a comment on tariffs. A 1-minute anecdote. We bought a small electronic device a week before last online and discovered it was being shipped direct from China.
Wow.
And in 5 days, we were able to track it to Shanghai, to Los Angeles, and then it was delivered. Within 5 days of ordering it, it was a $300 device direct from China. What was interesting is that in Los Angeles, California sales tax was collected, but there was zero tariff. And that is because in the Trump tariff on China and the ones that Biden has continued and expanded, there's an exemption for any item below the value of $800. And this has resulted in an enormous direct to end user of items being shipped from China. And apparently it's now up to about almost $100 billion a year of items which are exempt from the tariffs because they go to the end user in amounts less than $800. Just that's a comment.
Well, that's interesting. I certainly hadn't heard that. Thanks for that. China has realized that maybe they've reached their goals, and they've reduced their subsidies, and they've reduced their protective tariffs. And they think the way things are right now with what they're producing, they'll reach net zero emissions by 2060, which is quite something for the second leading economy in the world. And that means they're not importing as much from the unstable Middle East for petrochemicals, and their current energy activity accounts for 40% of their GDP growth. So they're really committed. And Xi in particular, this is one of his top priorities. So China will continue to lead the transition to clean energy. But the economist said, if the world lets it. So instead of seeing the local problems that America and the EU has, there must be some way for this overcapacity to be used to, for instance, get cheap energy to Africa. They don't have an infrastructure, but a solar panel, and Africa gets a lot of sunlight, will help mightily as Africa industrializes. Let's see. So here are the various projects distributed around China in clean energy. They're doing nuclear and hydro and wind, both offshore and onshore. Obviously, solar power. When we talked about this before, we saw the massive solar panel fields, and so there they are. China has gained a foothold in the Western Hemisphere, and I'm going to spend some time talking about Brazil, of all things. Because Brazil is going to be a good partner for China. They were in the last tariff war when Trump put tariffs on Chinese goods. China put tariffs on agricultural exports from America, and it really worked. You'll remember that Trump set up a special reimbursement fund for farmers who were no longer able to sell their produce. So Brazil stepped in and said, we'll give you soybeans, and what else do you need? And so China reciprocated by helping Brazil industrialize into a higher level. And so just a brief history on China and Brazil. Brazil was one of the first countries to establish diplomatic ties. This was even before America, or roughly around the same time. And then they developed what is called a strategic partnership, and that was upgraded to a comprehensive strategic partnership. So they've become best buds, and it's enabled Brazil to get a foothold in the Western Hemisphere economies. And so you can see that Brazil enjoys a positive trade balance with China, which has helped Brazil tremendously. And the main things that Brazil gets from China are textiles and steel. And what China gets from Brazil are the soybeans, the corn, and iron ore. So, as I said, they both benefited from Trump's last trade war, and no doubt they will again. So the current cumulative investment of China and Brazil is quite high, and all of these industries here. In addition, there's a true friendship budding. There are 12 Confucius Institutes, which promote an appreciation for Chinese history in particular. This allows Brazil to stand up to American bullying, and there's one really clear example in the last 24 hours. I'll get to that. But first of all, Lula and Trump dislike each other. Bolsonaro and Trump are pals. And you'll remember that Bolsonaro staged his own January 6th uprising against Lula after he won the election. recently, in the last couple of months, the Supreme Court has been fighting with Elon Musk. And it's over the charges of disinformation, and they've taken strong measures to censor what they consider disinformation. So the Supreme Court suspended Twitter X for 2 months. And Brazil's first lady, this is what happened the last 24 hours. She swore at Elon Musk at a G20 event. So Brazil's hosting the G20 as we speak. And she commented on the Supreme Court's decision to regulate social media to rein in misinformation, and Elon Musk has responded very brusquely and scolded Brazil, particularly the Supreme Court. While she was speaking, there was a distant horn that sounded, and she spontaneously quipped, "I think it's Elon Musk." And then she couldn't resist adding, "I'm not afraid of you." And this is what she said to Elon Musk. And so Elon Musk, of course, predicted that Lula would lose the next election. So God knows what he's going to do down there with the next election. So Lula has some very progressive goals. He's called on the nations to up the ante and financing anti-poverty, hunger. He called for a pledge for more money to fight climate change. Some of that would be to compensate undeveloped countries. And he wants to reform the international organizations like the World Bank and the IMF and the UN. And when we did our deep dive into Chinese history since World War II, that's one of their major demands, Xi's major demand. But here's the interesting one. He's touting a global tax on billionaires. Now, we've already seen the developed world be uniform in saying there should be a minimum corporate tax of 15%. So that there's something already going on in international circles. But this global tax on billionaires is something new. And when we talked about Piketty, and when we read the book, this was a proposal at that time. So China is very supportive. She is starting a state visit tomorrow in Brazil and reciprocating Lula's visit to China last year. Final comment on China. I'm sure you all have seen on the freeway or in the newspapers this Shen Yun.
It's a cult.
I did a deep dive on this a few years back and found out this is what China considers a religious cult, the Falun Gong. And it's you do a deep enough dive, you see how this is a Falun Gong promotional event. And they say it right here. This is the kind of culture the communists are trying to suppress. So that's China. All right, the big news on the Ukraine in the last couple of days is Biden is loosening restrictions on allowing Ukraine to use Western missiles to fire into Russia itself. They've always allowed Ukraine to use these missiles in Crimea because they don't recognize that it's Russian territory. And we see that they've been used with great effect in Crimea, neutralizing really the Russian dominance in the eastern part of the Black Sea. But it looks like what Biden is responding to is the fielding of North Koreans in the Kursk region. This is a huge escalation by Putin. So when that happened, Biden said that they could use the American missile systems, abbreviated ATACMS, to strike inside of Russia. British missiles have already been used to great effect in Crimea, and the Germans also have missile systems, as do the French, and it's unclear whether they will eventually loosen their restrictions on Ukrainian use. So, but for right now, it's only supposed to be used to defend Kursk, and you see here a map that Russia's already regained a lot of what Ukraine seized in Kursk. And so the question is, if these missiles are used to target specifically North Koreans, how will Kim react to that? What's Putin's next chess move? And he's already issued statements with his usual belligerence. So we'll see. The question is, would Iran feel the heat of this new policy and change their support? Who knows? Yeah, Psycho.
So did Russia get back that territory with the use of the Koreans?
No, it's some of it, but the Koreans just got there, so I don't think it's too much. Yeah, no problem. All right, so and then will Ukraine use these missiles on their so-called land bridge that they've secured? And they do that to secure their hold on Crimea. The other question is the Kerch Bridge, which goes from this part of Crimea to the Russian mainland. And it's a sitting duck. And people have wondered, when will Ukraine strike that bridge? And they're desperate now, and this may be the moment where they go after that Kerch Bridge. So the big, like in California, the big policy driver is water. Crimea has never had water. They've always got their water from the north, from the steppes. Most recently Ukraine, but always they've had to tap water from these reservoirs. And this was one reason why Putin acted as he did. The first thing he did when they marched across and got the land bridge is he opened up a artificial dam that Ukraine had placed across the river It's not a very big river, and it's reduced to a canal here. And he opened that up so Crimea could start getting the water again. And so water is a major thing. This shows the Kerch Bridge more clearly. So there's an interesting thing on some of these maps indicating there's Ukraine partisan activity deep in Donetsk. And I don't know what that's about, but that might be something to keep an eye on in the future. So why did Putin risk sending in North Koreans? He is reluctant to draft any more Russians. At this point, he might have to actually draft young men from St. Petersburg and Moscow, and he doesn't want to do that. Russia, like China, it has a low fertility rate. So the replacement level that you need is 2.1 per woman, and that's only got 1.4. So this is, I think, is at least one reason why they've had to turn to North Koreans. So they're dropping birth rates, been going on for at least 25 years, and they've taken other small actions, one banning promotion of child-free lifestyle. I wonder how that's going. And they even have suggested, listen, it's okay if on your work break you engage in intimate relations. I thought that was hilarious. I thought I'd share that with you.
Quickie.
A real quickie, yeah. So despite all these efforts, the fertility rate remains low. So Russia's big thinker, he's the intellectual behind Putin's thoughts on religion, quite reactionary. He brags, with Trump, we have won. The globalists are done. It's a rejection of the Atlantic Alliance, namely America and Europe. And Putin claims that the power of the liberal democracies is over. So there's a certain amount of triumphalism going on in Russia now. Family values, another little tidbit. On national TV, where they promote family values all the time, they were recently mocking and laughing at nude photos of Melania. So I don't know how Trump's going to take to that. The other question is, what's South Korea going to do? Are they going to respond? And they have sent weapons to Ukraine, but are they going to increase it even more and try to match North Korea? Any comments on the updates from Brazil and Ukraine?
Head spinning, all of it.
So I'll move on then to the topic of mass deportations. We try to stay away from evolving current events. That Ramsey has always done that. and in an effort to really keep us focused on history. And I'm going to do that. And I'm going to, in that spirit, ignore today's disturbing headlines. I'm going to stick to history and not participate in this unfolding reality show, because some of that is motivated merely to upset people like us. Just to say, if mass deportations raise their head again, I could see myself getting back to my old Vietnam mode with ICO and physically commit to protesting anything that they try to do in California. So let's get to the history. There have been a couple of mass deportations, one in the 1930s and one in 1954 during the Eisenhower era. In the 30s, it was reaction to the Great Depression, where there was so much unemployment here. A lot of the deportation then was voluntary. There weren't that many actual raids. Some of the targeted Mexicans were in fact citizens by virtue of being born here. But they went back with their families who were not citizens. So that statistics needs to be understood in that light. So in 54, Operation Wetback, as it was called, deported somewhere between 250,000 and 1 million. There were critiques even then of violation of human rights. What had brought so many illegal, undocumented Mexicans to California was World War II, when there was a shortage of farm workers. So by 1950s, they figured they didn't need them anymore. And that was the second wave targeting Mexicans. There are other mass deportations. I think we all are familiar with the Chinese Exclusion Act, which quickly expanded to all Asians. There were Irish that were targeted by deportations around the turn of the last century. And then in the 1990s, in this country, there were new efforts to target criminals who had immigrated here, and that was backed up with a new legislation. So I'll just insert parenthetically that in the 1960s, under LBJ, the limitations on immigration, which is a little bit different than deportation, but the thinking, looking at the other end, had been liberalized. In the 1920s, they had the limits on immigration had been increased massively. But by the 1960s, when we were faced with geopolitical considerations, an attempt was made to loosen those so as to neuter communist propaganda that the United States was a hypocrite in limiting Asian immigration. So that was the 1960s. But by the 1990s, there was again political movement to limit immigration and particularly deportations of criminals. Here are some surprises about the number of people deported. Under Clinton, 0.8 million. Under Bush, 2 million. And that's because of the new Department of Homeland Security after 9/11. With Obama, it was 3.2 million. As increased funding for immigration enforcement was jacked up. So I'll just insert here, DACA, of course, wanted to exempt childhood arrivals, and he tried to do that. He was thwarted eventually by the courts. But look at this. This is from Wikipedia. Trump decreased dramatically to 1 million the number of people deported under his regime. And so I think what got the headlines was the way they did it, which was raids on workspaces and removal of families. So some of that is just, it looked bad. And then under Biden, get this, there were 5 million arrests, and the majority of them were deported, and that was 3.5 times higher than Trump. So I have no idea how the Democrats lost that debate in the last election. It's just that most people don't get into actual numbers. There's a state senator, Josh Becker. He's sponsoring a bill memorializing the Mexican repatriation. Some of this might be anticipating what's coming. And here's a few statistics so we know what we're talking about. 39% of Californians are Hispanic. 32% is Mexican. So 7% is Hispanic non-Mexican. The breakdown of the 27% of Californians who are immigrants, and that's quite high, by the way. It's said that once a population increases beyond 14% of foreign-born, and that's the definition of immigrants, foreign-born, that you get a political backlash. Well, we're well above that here in California. And of the 27% who were born abroad, 14% are now citizens. Of the remaining, 7.5 are documented. So they've got a green card or a visa. That leaves 4.2% of undocumented. So this is equal to 1.4 million, and that would be the target population that Trump and Steve Miller are going to try to deport. So our job is to protect the 1.4 million of our fellow Californians. Yes.
The thing is that not all undocumented people coming through the Mexican border are Mexicans. I mean, there's a lot of other Latin Americans. There's also Asians. Do you know what percentage of them are not Mexican?
Yeah, not right off the top of my head, but when we were talking about China before, the largest ethnic group to increase, the largest increase in rate of immigration were Chinese. And
Mexico?
they would come mostly through the Darien Gap. The Chinese, you'd have to be wealthy enough to get an airplane ticket, and then you become a tourist and you just become undocumented. But not many Chinese can even afford that. So those that can somehow get to South America, and then they come up through the Darien Gap. I'll see if I can find the slides that I made up for this interesting phenomenon of more Chinese. And that's just another point about how unhappy Chinese are living in China. The other problem with China is their level of legal immigration is zero. They are a very insular people and have been so for, I don't know, 5,000 years. So they're not welcoming. Japan was that way, but they are absorbing because they have a very low fertility rate. So they're absorbing more Asians, Filipinos to come and work in their healthcare system and domestic duties for their very aging society. And so Filipinos, a lot more Koreans, which is a complicated story, as we all know.
Yeah, but I wonder if, like, for example, the Chinese immigration or illegal immigration wasn't because of that woman who ran, and it's sort of the after effects of her activities.
Yeah, the snake.
Yeah, and there was a whole book on her and her activities. But what are we gonna do sending back Chinese to Mexico? Then what? Mexico deports them or what?
I don't know. That's current events. I'll beg not to know, and that's
I bet Mexico will be plenty mad.
We shall see, but not in this group. Yes, Bruce.
Yeah, question for you. We, as part of our Mountain Shadow Film Society, we hosted a couple from, actually, they're from Kazakhstan, and he is out of Iran, and then ultimately he spent 4 years kind of being in the United Nations camp in Turkey. And ultimately he was given the choice, he said, of places they'd like to go. And, and so he said that, he really wanted to go to Norway. Well, Norway doesn't accept any new immigrants. Oh, well, how about Australia? Oh, well, Australia doesn't have any new immigrants. How about Canada? Well, they're not taking any new immigrants. And so it basically came down to, how about the United States? Oh, yeah, you can go to the United States. And so he ended up then actually in Los Angeles with, $1,400 in his pocket. It was kind of very unique.
Yeah, interesting story. We'll see if there'll be cases like that of people who can get through what's coming. Okay. So I'll finish off with a feel-good story. Every state gets to choose two luminaries that can represent their state in the Capitol Statuary Hall. And we did this earlier, but we have some new people, so I thought it would be fun to go through it. I'll just throw it out. Anybody know who our two luminaries are?
Yeah.
Yeah, Junipero Serra
Yes. Sadly. Uh-huh.
and Reagan. Here he is. And here's Junipero Serra. So this is what it looks like from the front, but you'll remember that Pope Francis came in 2015 to beatify Junipero Serra. And so here he is. The cross is blocking out Nancy Pelosi. But I think Biden was there and John Boehner, all Catholics, Kevin McCarthy. Yeah, so those are our two. So there's a musician that the state of Arkansas just selected. Anybody want to hazard a guess? Oh, wait just a second. There's a statue, and I forgot about that. We're doing this quiz. Aiko and I saw this statue, and you'll never guess where.
Well, we don't have to guess because you have it up there.
So it's actually this statue was based on a statue that Palma in Mallorca put up of him, his hometown. So it was in Havana. What? Havana? What? This was in Havana, and it turned out I did a deep dive on that, and it turned out that it was a tourist company that was helping Cuba attract Spanish tourists. So there you go. There's a similar statue in San Juan Capistrano, which I think was briefly taken down during Black Lives Matter, that whole thing. So
John, as an aside, I went to a new mission just this week to Mission Basilica San Buenaventura in Santa Barbara.
Yeah.
And it was the last mission that he personally built.
Yeah.
There were other ones. So I was there. I was going to pull up a picture. There's a statue of him. Oh, there he is. So there's another statue of.
Okay, let me
I just took that 2 to 3 days.
Oh, whoops. Anyway. I'll hold it up to over my face here. So that's good. Julia's anticipating where we're going next. We got Sarah all the way to Monterey.
Right.
And we will get him through. So I'm putting this up and I'm trying to mirror. Yeah. This is it. So we'll be talking more about him next week, I promise. Although I keep promising, and so the first musician ever to be honored with a statue. I'll give you a clue. Here's what this is truly an ecumenical pick. Republican Mike Johnson said he was a man who embodied the American spirit. And then Democrat leader Hakeem Jeffries, a trailblazing, transformational, trend-setting figure. And who could that be but the man in black, Johnny Cash? So here's Hakeem Jeffries and Mike Johnson actually standing next to each other. This happened in September in the heat of the campaign. And the governor, the Republican governor, talked about his struggle and his progress fighting for the underdog, and he did. He has a Bible in his hand and a guitar across his shoulder. he was born in the Great Depression. His daughter, Roseanne, said he had the mind of a mystic interested in the mysteries of the universe.
The
And
Bible is right side up instead of upside down.
and he's also the first professional musician of all the 50 states to be so honored. And Roseanne pointed out, yeah, he was a man of contradictions. He opposed the Vietnam War, but he performed for the troops. He was invited by Nixon to the White House, and Nixon wanted him to sing a song that Cash had not written, but he refused to sing it since he thought it denigrated the poor. And that song was Welfare Cadillac. I don't know if you all remember that. He didn't write it. He also refused to sing Okie from Muskogee. And here he is with Jimmy Carter. His wife, June Carter, was a distant relative of Jimmy. Yeah, a distant cousin. I didn't know that. And instead, he sang this song for Nixon, the Ballad of Ira Hayes. Really a moving story of this Native American who was one of these soldiers that hoisted the flag over Iwo Jima, the famous iconic photo. I'll also mention, just while we're on the topic of Native Americans, Netflix has a interesting series set on the Navajo reservation where Aiko and I worked, based on a Tony Hillerman novel, which features two Navajo policemen. It's called Dark Wind. We really liked the first season. The second season didn't look quite as good. So Johnny Cash, he had a television show, I remember, 1969 through 71. And he persisted in singing songs about the downtrodden, even though variety shows were not designed for that. But he also sang in prisons, famously Folsom. He inspired reform in more than a few, and one of those few was Merle Haggard, who was in San Quentin in 1958 and heard Johnny Cash sing. Haggard was in for armed robbery. He picked up a guitar in San Quentin, emerged and became famous enough to be invited on the Johnny Cash show. And he told the story of redemption live on national TV. By the way, the other statue that Arkansas picked to reinvigorate their selections was Daisy Bates. She was a mentor to the Little Rock Nine, the young middle school blacks who integrated Central High School in Little Rock. And this is her stavue, and another picture of Daisy Bates with her charges and support group. All right, so this will be where we'll stop. We'll get back to just California next week. So any comments or questions?
Well done, Johnny. Well done.
Well, thank you. Okay.
Don't leave, Bruce, because we want to talk about the movie. Wasn't it, Bruce?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, you
Yeah,
bet.
I guess, let's see, where am I guess?
We don't want to give away the movie. What was it called? It was called
There's always
There's
tomorrow.
always tomorrow. Yeah.
yeah.
And the um,
Do you think that she was trying?
I'm going to stop taping.
Okay.